begin today in Malawi, where an aircraft carrying the country's vice president, Saulos Chilima, and 9 others has gone missing. According to a statement from the country's presidential office, the plane went off the radar following its departure from the capital Lilongwe on Monday morning.
This was what was left of Malawi's Vice President Saulos Chilima's airplane, 24 hours after it went missing in the small country of Malawi. The plane crashed and killed the Vice President and 8 others on board on 10th of June 2024. No one survived. Grief and suspicion engulfed the nation, while the government was slow and vague to act. Malawians refused to accept the official story that poor weather and pilot error were the cause of the accident. Today, Malawians are still asking what happened to the Vice President. Was it murder, negligence, or just an unfortunate accident as per the government's narrative?
Arrival in Zuzu, the pilot was unable to land the plane due to poor visibility occasioned by bad weather. And aviation authorities advised the aircraft to return to Lilongwe. But the authorities soon lost contact with the aircraft.
This is the strange death of the Vice President of Malawi, Saulos Chilima, which left the country with so many unanswered questions, and at the time on the brink of violence. The small transport military plane Donia 228 had 9 people on board the Vice President's entourage, which consisted of staff and security personnel. Among them, the former First Lady Shanil Zimbili, the ex-wife of former President Wakili Muluzi, an advisor to the Vice President. There were 3 crew members, 2 pilots and the flight engineer. But to understand the story, let's go back in time. The popular Malawian Vice President Saulos Chilima, who many looked at as the president in waiting, was born on 12th of February 1973 in Nchewu, Malawi. Chilima was 51 years old when he died in the plane crash. Malawi is a southeast landlocked tiny African nation known for its vast lake and the long rule of Dr. Hastings Kamuzibanda. Saulos Chilima did not rise through politics slowly. He burst into it. When he entered public life in 2014, he was young, polished and different. A former tech executive, a corporate leader who spoke with confidence and clarity. He was fit, athletic, charismatic and disciplined. A man who ran marathons, lifted weights, played basketball. But more importantly, he connected with the youth and ordinary Malawians who saw in him a break from the past. In 2014, he was handpicked from the private sector as a running mate to the then opposition leader, Dr. Peter Mutharika, now the president, under the Democratic Progressive Party, DPP. They won. At 39 years old, he became the country's vice president. Many saw him as a symbol of generational change. He was popular among the youths who make up the majority of the Malawian population. To many, it was just a matter of time till Saulos Chilima became the president of Malawi. But politics is rarely stable, and in 2018, Chilima broke away from the DPP and formed his own party, the UTM. Then came the historic 2020 rerun election. Chilima entered an alliance with the Malawi Congress Party, serving as running mate to Dr. Lazarus Chakwera. They won. The DPP government was tossed out at the ballot. Lazarus Chakwera became president. Saulos Chilima became vice president for the second time for him. Outwardly, in the beginning, the alliance looked strong. President Chakwera and Vice President Saulos Chilima were seen working together. Privately, however, tensions simmered. Power-sharing arrangements strained. Political ambitions collided. These 2 leaders had vastly 2 different political philosophies. In hindsight, their political marriage was incompatible. And slowly, a quiet rivalry took shape. Never openly declared but widely held. And over time, it became clear that this was an alliance held together more by necessity than trust. And it was just a matter of time before the fall crumbled. Chilima was a big threat to the MCP regime. MCP supporters could not stand the fact that he did not belong to the MCP and he was the vice president of the country. He was best positioned to become the next president of Malawi. He was deemed as a potential credible challenger to President Chakwera in the 2025 general elections, which were a year away when he lost. Some argue that Chilima had a good chance of potentially winning the 2025 elections. Of course, we will never know.
You could be getting the first disbursement, the first tranche. It could be anything between $50 and $100 million. We have, made a further request of close to 370 million, which is in the process of being reviewed.
Let's take it back to the 7th of June 2024. It seems that's when the unstoppable and unfortunate chain of events started, leading to the plane crash 4 days later on the 10th of June 2024. On June 7th, 2024, tragedy struck for the first time. Ralph Kasambala died suddenly. He lived in the southern region of Malawi. Now, who was Ralph Kasambala, and why is he important in the context of the story? Ralph Kasambala was a prominent lawyer, a former Minister of Justice, a former Attorney General, but more importantly, he was one of Saulos Chilima's closest friends. Because of his stature, Ralph Kasambala was granted a full state funeral by the government. His burial was scheduled for June 10th in Kata Bay, northern Malawi. At the time of Kasambala's death, Chilima was still abroad. He had just represented Malawi at the Korea Africa Summit in South Korea from June 4th to June 5th. Footage from that summit shows a confident vice president, calm, engaged, and fully immersed in diplomatic duty. No one could have known then that Kasambala's funeral would become a tragic turning point. On June 9th, Chilima and his wife arrived back in Malawi. They landed at Chileka International Airport in Blantyre in the southern region. This was meant to be a brief layover before continuing on to Lilongwe, the capital city of Malawi where he resided. Coincidentally, or perhaps fatefully, Ralph Kasambala's body was also scheduled to arrive at Chileka Airport around the same time. Chilima thought about it, and then he hoped to offer condolences to Kasambala's family right there at the airport, sparing himself a long journey north the next day. But delays intervened. Kasambala's hearse arrived late. By the time it did, Chilima and his wife had already left on a scheduled commercial airplane for Lilongwe. Ralph Kasambala's body was flown to the northern region in a Dornier 228, an old transport military aircraft operated by the Malawi Defense Force. It may be one of two or slightly more of the entire fleet of the military planes which was functioning at the time. The Malawi Defense Force essentially does have very few aircrafts. It is important to take note of this airplane as it is important to the story. That afternoon, Chilima considered his options carefully. He tried to persuade his wife to attend the funeral on his behalf. But she said she could not go as she was tired after the long journey and had other pressing issues, understandably so. He finally arranged logistics for a road journey to Mzuzu, the northern region, the following morning for the burial. But time was against him. Vice President Chilima was also scheduled to see off President Chakwera, who was traveling to the Bahamas later that day. The distance from Lilongwe to Mzuzu is long, 4 to 5 hours by road. So if he went by road, he would have failed to see off the president. Not a good look for that time's political climate. At the last moment, Chilima made a different choice. He would fly. It was roughly about 50 minutes flight. So it was faster, more efficient. and as it would turn out for him, far more dangerous. His office made arrangements with the military to organize a plane for him. The aircraft assigned for the journey was the same Donia 228. The aircraft is the one which had flown the hearse of his friend Ralph Kasambara to the northern region the previous day. A coincidence that many Malawians still struggle to ignore. Just a little note on that aircraft. According to both the German Federal Bureau of Aircraft Accident Investigation and Malawi's Commission of Inquiry, the aircraft was manufactured in 1986. It was nearly 4 decades old. It had no cockpit voice recorder or flight data recorder. However, it had a functioning GPS, which was later retrieved to trace and determine the flight's route. Official statements declared that the aircraft was airworthy, but the broader picture raised so many questions. Maintenance records were incomplete. June mornings in northern Malawi are harsh. There is cold air, persistent fog, and low cloud cover. On June 10, 2024, the Vice President Chilima left his Lilongwe residence and went to the airport to board the plane. At 9:16 in the morning, the Donia 228 took off and departed Lilongwe International Airport with the expected arrival time in Mzuzu of 10:05, a short 45 minutes trip. At 9:23, the airplane reached a cruise level of 7,000 feet and passed the border of Lilongwe Airport Control Zone. Mzuzu Airport, their destination, does not support full instrument landings. In poor weather, pilots rely on visual flight rules. Fly low, searching for landmarks. That morning, visibility was so poor, and because of this, the pilots could not locate the airport. They maneuvered repeatedly, attempting to locate the Mzuzu airport visually. They made several turns and corrections again and again. It was obvious that the passengers on board knew something was very wrong. They must have been terrified. One of the very last messages from one of the Vice President's staff sent to a friend simply said, "Too much turbulence." The last communication with Mzuzu Airport was recorded at 10:12 a.m. 4 minutes later, at approximately 10:16 a.m., the aircraft struck the ground inside Ntungwa Forest, deep within the Chikangawa Forest in the northern region. This was about 35 kilometers from Mzuzu Airport. First, the aircraft's outer part of the right wing collided with a tree trunk at a height of about 4.5 meters above ground. Part of the honeycomb structure of the wing was found struck in the tree trunk. There was no mayday call, no emergency signal, no final transmission, just silence. There is no extensive radar coverage in Malawi. Claims that the plane fell off the radar are misleading. There is only limited radar coverage within the diameter of Lilongwe Airport. Concern began to spread shortly after. The Mzuzu Airport controller failed to establish contact again. He inquired with Lilongwe whether the aircraft had returned to the airport or landed at any of the small airports with unpaved runways. But no one had seen or heard from the aircraft. The flight crews of 2 other aircraft flying at high altitudes were asked to attempt radio contact with the missing airplane. All attempts remained unsuccessful. By around 11:30 a.m., the Rescue Coordination Center was activated. President Chakwera was informed that the Vice President's plane was missing. Search efforts began, but they were slow. There were no helicopters immediately deployed, because there are no helicopters in Malawi. There is no aerial surveillance, no thermal imaging. Worse still, Malawi has no dedicated air search and rescue capability. The airplane's emergency locator transmitter, which could have helped locate the plane easily, was not functioning since 2004 when it ran out of battery. The search remained wildly disorganized. Everyone was doing their own thing. The police and the army were supposedly leading the search. Local Malawians joined in the search. It was so chaotic. So the search moved on foot and by vehicle through thick forest and difficult terrain. As the hours passed, the government said very little. Families waited, journalists waited, a nation waited. It was around 3 p.m. when the office of the president produced a small press statement, letting the public know that indeed the vice president's plane had gone missing. No press conferences, no updates from the Rescue Coordination Center. That was it. The country relied on independent radio and TV stations for roaring coverage of the incident. There was no sense of urgency on the part of government, so it seemed. By nightfall, hope was fading. At 11 p.m., nearly 12 hours after the vice president had gone missing, President Chakwera finally addressed the nation. A case of too little too late. There was no good news. He said he had contacted countries such as the UK, Israel, and the US for help with the search. Malawians wondered, why not just ask the neighbors with capabilities such as Tanzania and South Africa for assistance?
And as you heard, the president got information around 3 o'clock, and then the statement was released at 5 o'clock, and now addressing the nation at 11 p.m. And therefore, the sense of urgency, that's what people are asking for. Now, the question here is, when you look at 10, 3, 5, 11, and secondly, he pointed out that he has received messages from international community, particularly countries such as UK, US, and Israel. The question is, did he ask for assistance in the SADC region, his neighbor? And I can assure you there are countries in the SADC region who have capabilities.
Then came the announcement that stunned the public. Search operations were being suspended for the night. Outrage erupted across the country. Citizens demanded that the search continue. Authorities then reversed course, but without new resources, coordination, or clarity. By now, the damage had been done. Sirens had bred doubt. Why was the government keeping quiet and moving so slow? On June 11th, mid-morning, nearly 24 hours later, soldiers located the crash site. There were no survivors. Vice President Saulos Chilima was dead. So were the 8 others on board. According to the report by BFU, Germany's Federal Bureau of Aircraft Accident Investigation, the passengers would have died on impact. The pilots, after flying at low altitudes for a long time in poor visibility, trying to locate Mzuzu Airport, were unaware of where they were. They collided with a tree and crashed into the high terrain. To highlight the lack of resources by the Malawi Defense Force, 2 aircrafts, a helicopter and 1 fixed air wing provided by the Zambian Defense Force carried the bodies of the casualties, including that of the Vice President of Malawi, to the capital city of Lilongwe.
Letsa misozi ndithu nthawi yowawitsa kwambiri ku dziko lino. Kuno kwafikanso nduna za boma la lero lino. Ndipotu chisoni ndi chachikulu makamakanso kubanja la.
2 official investigations followed. The German Federal Bureau of Aircraft Investigation, BFU, examined the technical aspects of the crash. Malawi's Commission of Inquiry examined response times, coordination failures, and decision-making. Crucially, both concluded that the crash was an accident due to weather conditions and pilot's error. But conclusions do not erase doubt. Malawians think that there is more to the story than what was being reported. Why did communication take so long? Why was the search so poorly resourced? Why was a senior national leader flying in such conditions in such an aircraft? And why did the government lose control of the narrative so completely? Today, many in Malawi believe that the then ruling MCP orchestrated the murder of the vice president. In 2025, just over a year after the vice president's death, the MCP government was voted out of power. Among many failures, the death of Vice President Saulos Chilima was among the reasons political analysts cite for MCP's dismal performance at the elections. Today, calls are ongoing to institute another commission of inquiry to re-examine the case. Vice President Chilima was laid to rest on Monday, the 17th of June 2024, at his village in Mchewu. For a few days, tensions were high and it seemed violence was inevitable. But the people kept it together and waited for the elections in 2025 to vent their anger at the government by voting in a new government. With his burial, the hopes of millions of the youth of Malawi went with him. I'll see you later.